and I disembarked at Tokyo Air Terminal and grabbed a cab to our hotel, Niwa. The brochure calls it a place where light shines gently through washy paper screens into rooms imbued with an elegance beyond luxury. Actually, that's not too much of an overstatement.
Please take all your items.
Everything in Japan talks to you.
Thank you.
Tokyo is absolutely jam-packed with businessmen in suits. More than the city of London, as far as I can tell. Our first excursion was to Mirai-kan, the National Museum of Emerging Science and Innovation. The museum is jammed full of technological wonders, but the main event was the delight of seeing Asimo the robot in the flesh, or at least in his diodes, transistors and plastic superstructure. Asimo put on a display for about 15 minutes, which mesmerised the huge crowd of children, and not a few astonished grown-ups like Carol and myself. On our first night in the Hotel Niwa, we both slept well. Then we set off for a guided tour of Tokyo in the company of an acquaintance of Carol, a young lady called Katsura, and her man, Hans.
That's Japanese, special Japanese spiced salt. That's another kind of salt. That's wasabi salt. That's salt.
My first bowl of Japanese miso. This is Hans eating his lunch with us. Katsura, a very thoughtful sort of young woman, had arranged for a bus tour of the Ginza district, which included a stop-off at a street market lined with cherry blossoms, where an amazing selection of cheap and amusing tat could be purchased. I was very tempted by a model of Mecha Godzilla, but manfully I resisted. At the far end of the market stood the Senso-ji Temple, a Buddhist shrine where we had to cleanse ourselves with water from a decorative well before being allowed to enter into the presence of the divinity within the temple.
Save something and then do right left hand again and then come it into your mouth.
Okay.
No, this, the water in your, yes, to clean your mouth. Clean your hands and clean your mouth.
From the temple, we all walked down to a wide river for a cruise, where we were refreshed by glasses of Asahi beer. After night fell, Carol and I took a JR line train to Shinjuku East. The area is a mass of garish little back streets lined with what we could only imagine were brothels. Eventually, though, we made our way to what looked like a respectable sushi bar, the Sushi Mamiri, where we shared a sashimi selection for two, some delicious miso, and some warm sake. The next day came, as next days do, and another cracking breakfast at the Hotel Niwa set us up for a busy day, starting at the old fish market. There were stalls full of huge decapitated fish heads with and without eyes, whizzing trucks propelled by giant gas canisters, and a film crew was filming one of the stall holders who was struggling to keep a large live fish under control. It was a lot of fun. From the fish market, we strolled on through an area of restaurant stalls where people, many of them businessmen in suits and ties, tucked into delicacies which we could not begin to identify. Carol reckoned our most used phrase during that trip was "not a clue." We strolled up a broad avenue to Mitsukoshi, a vast department store, pretty much the Harrods of Tokyo, and wandered around it with mouths agape. And we wound up in a delightful French cafe restaurant called Bamboo. In an underground railway station on the way back to the hotel, we were delighted to find a mall of small food counters jammed with exotic foods. We could have spent the rest of the day there just admiring the cakes, fish, desserts, crispy treats, and bright yellow and lemon and pale green things crammed in between slices of white bread. April the 2nd found us having a very early start. We were off to catch the Shinkansen, also known as the bullet train, for our first excursion out of Tokyo. The train was as splendid as everyone told us it would be. Lots of space for long legs, odd given how short the Japanese are, and very comfortable, very fast and very efficient.
This is the Kodama Super Express, bound for Nagoya.
Carol has very quickly figured out how to use her iPad on the internet on the bullet train. Arriving safely in the mountain town of Hakone, we dropped our cases at our ryokan, which is a traditional hotel with futons instead of beds. We strolled down past gardens with waterfalls, ponds, fish, ducks, bells, temples and more into the main street for a look at the tourist shops. We picked a restaurant at random. It looked a bit like a transport cafe but turned out to be much more. The Utrillo offered fairly basic but tasty food, quite westernised, but there was also the decor, which was a weird assemblage of two-headed dogs, Victorian dolls, an erotic puppet-style woman in her lingerie, and dozens of paintings and prints. One of them a genuine Utrillo, presumably worth a small fortune. We were dressed in kimonos for our evening meal, which was served to us in our room. A charming Japanese lady in full traditional costume brought our food in. Carol enjoyed the experience more than me, but we both agreed that the meal itself was not the best we've had. After dinner, a man entered and made up our futons on the floor. They turned out to be really quite comfortable. Thursday, April the 3rd was a very full day on a pre-arranged trail around Hakone, beginning with a ride on a switchback railway which took us up into an area of hot springs and natural gas outlets. The weather was really not very good at all, and at the top of the volcanic hill we discovered the pinnacle of Japanese commercial ingenuity. A cunning scheme to make people pay for and eat boiled eggs. It was here on this trip that we encountered one of the best pieces of advice we've ever seen. Do not touch doubtful things. Unfortunately, not all Japanese signs are helpful. This one reads, "There is Kuro Tamago at the time of running out of stock, and pardon it, please." As near as we could tell, Kuro Tamago translates as hard-boiled eggs, boiled in the sulphur pits.
Hello, and here we are going down in the Keburo Karo.
According to our guidebook, the cable car would take us down over Lake Ashi, which would be glinting in the sunlight. We were also promised that from the boat crossing Lake Ashi, we would have fabulous views of Mount Fuji. But these never materialized. Happily, our next stop, the Hakone Gongen Shrine, made up for the total lack of Mount Fuji. Not only was it an unusually peaceful and tranquil place, as we passed through it, we encountered a toad with another toad riding piggyback on top of it. We returned to Tokyo on another bullet train. Let me say again, in case I haven't already said it, that the bullet train is the best train in the world by far. After breakfast the following morning, we set off for the small town of Yudanaka. There is a park near Yudanaka called Jigokudani Onsen, which is famous because monkeys live there in a high range of mountains where it often snows. But the monkeys have learned to use the local hot springs to stay warm. We spent the night in Isano Komichi Biyu no Yado, a far superior ryokan than our previous one. Our evening meal was probably the best food we've had thus far in Japan. Particularly memorable were the mushrooms plucked from logs on the table and then grilled on an open flame before our very eyes. Dinner was followed by an intimate concert of taiko drumming in the reception area, which featured shamisen improvisations and a lion dance. Early the next morning, on our way to Kanazawa, we stopped to have a look at the famous Black Castle in Matsumoto. In a rather splendid 80-year-old second-hand bookshop nearby, I found a little one-armed Godzilla figure. Gojira, the bookseller corrected me. As our bus climbed ever higher into the Japanese Alps, the road became more steep, twisting and dramatic, running alongside deep gorges with raging rivers. When the bus eventually dropped us in Takayama, we were told it was a 5-minute walk to the ryokan, but we got hopelessly lost, until a group of old Japanese ladies kindly showed us the way. I found myself wondering at one point that night how it is that a nation that has motion-sensing escalators everywhere doesn't seem to have yet discovered how to do perforated toilet rolls. The next morning was cold but quite sunny, so we set off to visit the ancient private dwellings and the morning market along the banks of the local river. riverside market was a delight to stroll through, and we bumped into several people we had met on earlier parts of our trip. Carol purchased some lovely white-spotted black gloves. We also picked up a few odds and ends to take home, including some lovely origami figures made by one of the stallholders. We stopped in to see an Edo period showplace house full of lovely items from ancient days. This being a bitterly cold day, we most appreciated a warm little room in the middle of the house where the custodian served us with hot tea. The house was also blessed with a little gas fire where Carol and I sat and warmed our toes. A few steps further down the street we found a very welcoming little cafe. Carol had pancakes and maple syrup, but I had toast, thick white bread, crisp on the outside but soft inside. Possibly the best toast experience known to mankind. It was about noon on Sunday, April the 6th, that we caught a bus to Shirakawa Go. It was another stunning ride through snowy forests on steep mountain slopes to get to Shirakawa Go. It's a World Heritage Site, and deservedly so, created in 1972 by bringing traditional farmhouses from other villages and reconstructing them at Shirakawa Go in the same layout as has been used since time immemorial. It snowed so heavily during our few hours at Shirakawa Go that we didn't even manage to cross the narrow river bridge to see the houses on the other side, but what we did see was wonderful. Later that afternoon we boarded yet another bus which took us back down to sea level and the city of Kanazawa. Next morning, fortified by a delicious breakfast in the Cascade restaurant of the Anna Crown Plaza, we made our way to the Higashi Pleasure District. We ambled past former geisha houses, shrines and temples. But we also popped into a shamisen maker's shop where we drank vile green tea. But on the upside, we were allowed to practice playing on various exotic instruments. Their in-house expert demonstrated how to play the shamisen. But in fact, I don't think Carol did too badly at all.
Oh well.
After strolling around for a bit longer, we headed for the bus to Kenryuokan Gardens, said to be one of the top 3 gardens in Japan. The main attraction was obviously the beautiful lotus blossoms, but I also enjoyed a deliciously hot takeaway item from a stall at the entrance, a sort of crumpety dough base with a fried egg inside and a bit of sausage on top. Mid-afternoon, we boarded the Thunderbird Express bound for Kyoto. Our hotel was within walking distance of the Toji Temple, which dates back to the Edo period and features the highest pagoda in Japan at 187 feet. While we were sitting outside the temple, we heard a voice saying, "Hello there, Carol," and looked up to see the smiling face of Dave Marshall, who used to be a gardener at Roudford School where Carol taught. Nara Gardens, we did not at first understand the warning signs until we realised that the deer were particularly fond of attacking specific parts of the human anatomy. Popularly known as the messengers of the gods, one of them bit Carol on the bum. We rendezvoused again with Dave Marshall, and we all trooped around the world's largest Buddha before lighting a candle in memory of our dear friend Maggie Ducker. After parting with Dave Marshall again, Carol and I returned to the Gion district for the evening and an interesting dinner.
We're in a strange restaurant
Gion district.
in the Gion district where you order the food on a computer. I'm just eating some Korean pizza for some reason. And Carol is having sashimi.
One of the many lovely aspects of riding in the Shinkansen was that the ticket collector, after having taken your ticket, goes to the end of the carriage and bows as he leaves. Our final stop in Japan was the island of Miyajima.
Okay.
Baseball player.
We spent the night in the seaside ryokan. And the next morning we set off for a stroll around the town. On Miyajima, deer run freely through the quiet streets, eating credit cards which they steal from the bags of tourists. I can't help but wonder if there's anywhere else in the world that you can buy deer poop, which, by a very happy coincidence, rhymes with world's biggest rice scoop. And just a few steps away, if they haven't sold out, you can get yourself some Hiroshima Cola or some Pocari Sweat. Carol's favourite, however, was the takeaway oyster stand. We spent the next morning rambling along the beach, heading for Itsukishima Shrine. On our stroll, we bumped into a couple of very nice American tourists. After leaving the shrine, we made our way to a very different type of experience.
Thank you for taking the Miyajima ropeway today.
It was a breathtakingly spectacular ropeway ride, which transported us slowly and silently over a magical landscape of green forests and blue sea. Once we had recovered our land legs, we headed for Daishan Temple, a wonderfully serene place. While there, Carol took the opportunity to have a second go at the hand cleansing ritual, which had been taught to her at the very beginning of her Japan trip by hands in Tokyo.